Scotland tried to build a colony in Panama. It was called the Darien Scheme. A lot of people call it a huge failure. It was. It cost Scotland almost everything. Thousands of lives were lost. The whole country went broke. This big dream became a national nightmare. Scotland in the late 1600s was not a rich place. It was a small country. England was a much bigger power. Scotland wanted its own way to get rich. And it watched other countries. They had colonies. They had trade routes. Scotland had neither. Its economy was struggling. Many people were poor. The future looked bleak. Then came William Paterson. He was a Scot. Paterson was a smart man. He helped set up the Bank of England, so he knew about money and trade. He had a big idea. He believed a global trade hub was the answer. He thought this hub should be in a specific place. The Isthmus of Panama. It was a narrow strip of land. It connected North and South America. It sat between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Patterson's idea was simple. Build a colony there. Make it a trading post. Ships from Europe could come. They would unload their goods. These goods could be carried a short distance overland, then loaded onto ships waiting on the Pacific side. These ships would take them to Asia, and goods from Asia would come back the same way. It would be a shortcut. It would avoid the long, dangerous journey around South America. Patterson called it the door of the seas, the key of the universe. This idea excited many Scots. It promised great wealth. It promised national pride. It offered a way to escape poverty. The Scottish Parliament approved the plan. They created the Company of Scotland trading to Africa and the Indies. This was the group that would make it happen. But there was a problem: raising money. Scotland was poor. It did not have much capital. Patterson tried to get English investors. He tried to get Dutch and German investors, but England was not happy. It saw Scotland's plan as a threat. And England had its own trade companies. They did not want competition. The English king, William III, told English investors to pull out. He did not want to upset Spain, which claimed Panama, so Scotland had to do it alone. The people of Scotland stepped up. They invested almost all the money they had: nobles, merchants, farmers, servants. Everyone put in what they could. It was an incredible national effort. About a quarter to half of all the money in Scotland was invested. It showed how desperate and hopeful the nation was. They believed in this dream. They thought it would make Scotland rich and powerful. They saw it as their chance. The nation was buzzing with excitement. Ships were being built. Supplies were bought. 20,000 signed up to go. They were ready to claim their future. The first expedition left Scotland in July 1698. 5 ships sailed from Leith. They were the Caledonia, St. Andrew, Unicorn, Dolphin, and Endeavour. On board were about 1,200 people. Most were men. Some were soldiers. Some were farmers. Some were tradesmen. They were adventurers too. They dreamed of new lives. They dreamed of wealth. They carried tools, weapons, and provisions. They also carried a lot of hope. The journey was long and hard. The ships were crowded. Food and water were rationed. Diseases started to spread even before they reached their destination. Sickness was common on long sea voyages then. But they pushed on. They were heading for a new world. They were going to build a new Scotland. After about 3 months, they reached the coast of Darien. This was a remote, wild place. It was not like the maps had shown. It was not an empty paradise. It was a dense jungle. The air was hot and humid. There were mosquitoes everywhere. The land was swampy in parts. Mountains rose steeply in others. This was not an easy place to build a colony. Still, the initial optimism was high. They landed near a natural harbor. They chose a spot to build their settlement. They named it New Edinburgh. The nearby fort was called Fort St. Andrew. They set to work. They cleared land. They built huts. They tried to make it home. They put up a flag. Scotland was now on the world map, they thought. But the reality quickly set in. The climate was terrible. Europeans were not used to the tropical heat. It drained their strength. The fresh water was often scarce or contaminated. Food supplies began to run out. The food they brought spoiled quickly in the heat. It was not suitable for the tropics. Things like salted meat and dried biscuits were not enough. There was no fresh food. They had not planned well for growing their own food. The soil was not good for European crops. The colonists were not experienced farmers in this kind of environment. Disease hit hard and fast. Malaria was rampant. Yellow fever was deadly. Dysentery was common. These diseases killed many people. Doctors were few. Medicine was scarce. Many of the colonists were weakened by the journey and poor diet. They had no resistance. People started dying in large numbers. Graves were dug every day. They tried to interact with the local indigenous people. These were the Kuna people. The Kuna were friendly at first. They traded a bit. They showed the Scots some local plants and customs. But the Scots did not always treat them well. They did not understand the local ways. And the Kuna were wary. They had seen other Europeans before. They knew the dangers. The colonists tried to trade. They had brought some goods from Scotland, but these goods were not wanted by the Kuna. And the Scots did not have much to trade for. They found no gold. They found no rich spices. There was no easy wealth. The great vision of a thriving trade hub was not happening. Ships were not coming. The English had put pressure on their own colonies. They told them not to trade with Darien. The Scots were alone. They were isolated. They were dying. The dream was turning into a nightmare. They realized their supplies were running out. Sickness was everywhere, and they were losing hope. The situation in New Edinburgh got worse every day. The death rate was shocking. By December 1698, just a few months after landing, hundreds had died. More were sick. The few doctors they had were overwhelmed. The medicine they brought was useless against tropical diseases. Morale collapsed. People lost their will to work. They were too sick, too weak, or too sad. The leadership also became a problem. There were many arguments. No one could agree on what to do. The colonists were a mix of people. Some were gentlemen, not used to manual labor. Others were soldiers, used to fighting, not building a colony. They did not have the right skills. They did not have the right experience, and there was no single strong leader to guide them through the crisis. William Patterson, the man with the big idea, was among them, but he also fell ill. He was not able to take charge. The lack of food was constant. What little they managed to grow died. The climate and pests were too much. They relied on what they had brought. That was quickly gone. They began to starve. The only way to get food was to trade with the Kuna. But the Kuna did not have an endless supply. And the Scots had little to offer. The colony was also under threat. This land was claimed by Spain. Spain did not like the Scots settling there. Spanish patrols started showing up. They watched the Scottish fort. They made it clear the Scots were not welcome. The Spanish built up their forces nearby. They were preparing for an attack. The Scots were not ready for a fight. They were too weak, too sick. England did nothing to help. In fact, England made things worse. The English king, William III, issued orders. These orders told all English colonies in the Caribbean and North America they were not to supply the Scots in Darien. No food, no goods, no help. This was a deliberate act. England wanted the Scottish colony to fail. It was an economic war. It left the Scots completely cut off. They had no allies. They had no support. By June 1699, just 8 months after landing, the situation was hopeless. Only about 300 people were left alive. Most of them were sick. Many had died of disease. Some had died fighting with the Spanish. Others had simply starved. There was no hope of survival. The leaders, what was left of them, made a hard decision. They would abandon the colony. They packed what they could. They boarded the remaining ships. They left New Edinburgh. The once proud Fort St. Andrew stood empty. The graves of their dead were left behind. The journey home was just as bad. More people died on the way. Sickness still ravaged the ships. Some ships were lost at sea. Only a few hundred men made it back to Scotland. They were broken. They were sick. They brought news of complete disaster. This was a terrible blow. It was a huge financial loss for Scotland. But the country did not know the full extent yet. News traveled slowly in the 17th century. When the first survivors made it back to Scotland, the truth was hard to believe. Many refused to accept it. They thought the stories were exaggerated. They thought it was just bad luck. The Company of Scotland still had money, and the nation was still desperate for success. The dream of Darien was too strong to die easily, so, incredibly, a second expedition was launched. In August 1699, 4 more ships sailed from Scotland. On board were another 1,300 people. They carried more supplies, they carried more hope, they were determined to make it work. Many of them had no idea what awaited them. They had not heard the full, grim details of the first colony's failure. They were convinced they could succeed where the others had failed. These ships arrived in Darien in November 1699. What they found was horrifying. New Edinburgh was deserted. The fort was overgrown. Graves were everywhere. The jungle had reclaimed much of what the first colonists had built. The new arrivals were shocked. They found some letters. These letters confirmed the disaster. They learned of the mass deaths. They learned of the retreat. But they were already there. They had come too far. They decided to try again. They tried to restart the colony. They rebuilt some of the structures. They tried to plant crops. But the problems were the same. The climate was still brutal. Disease struck quickly. Malaria and yellow fever took hold again. The new colonists started dying just like the first ones. The conditions were even worse now. The ground was littered with the remnants of the first colony. The air was thick with despair. The leadership was still a mess. New governors had arrived. They often clashed with each other. Discipline broke down. Some people gave up. They just lay down and waited to die. Others became unruly. They did not follow orders. They argued and fought among themselves. And then the Spanish came. This time, they were much more aggressive. They knew the Scots were weak. They knew England would not help them. The Spanish governor of Cartagena was determined to drive the Scots out for good. He sent a large force. They set up a blockade by sea. They sent troops overland. The Scots found themselves under siege. They were trapped in Fort St. Andrew. The Spanish cut off their supplies. They bombarded the fort from land and sea. The Scots tried to fight back, but they were sick. They were starving, they were outnumbered, they had no hope of winning. The siege lasted for several weeks. Many more Scots died. They ran out of food, they ran out of water, they ran out of ammunition. Their resolve was broken. Finally, in March 1700, they surrendered. They negotiated terms with the Spanish. The Scots were allowed to leave. They had to promise never to return. The remaining colonists boarded their ships. They set sail for home. This journey was also a nightmare. Storms hit. More people died of disease and starvation. Many ships never made it back to Scotland. Of the 2,500 people who went to Darien, only a few hundred survived. Perhaps as few as 300. Some estimates say even fewer. It was an almost complete annihilation. The Darien scheme was over. It had failed in every way possible. It was a total, miserable human disaster. The failure of the Darien scheme was a catastrophe for Scotland. The financial cost was immense. The country had invested almost all its liquid capital. It was estimated to be around £400,000. This was a huge sum for Scotland at the time. Today, that would be billions of pounds. The money was simply gone. It was lost in the jungles of Panama and at the bottom of the sea. The human cost was even greater. Thousands of Scots died in Darien. They died of disease, starvation, and Spanish attacks. They died on the long, brutal voyages. Families back home waited for news that never came. Or they got news of death. Almost every family in Scotland was touched by the tragedy. The nation was in mourning. It was also in shock. The morale of the country was shattered. The great dream of wealth and power had turned into a national humiliation. Scotland was left bankrupt and demoralized. Its ambitions for an independent empire were crushed. Its economy was in ruins. This disaster had a profound impact on Scotland's future. It weakened the country so much it made Scotland vulnerable. Many historians believe the Darien scheme was a major cause of the Act of Union in 1707. This act joined Scotland with England to form Great Britain. Scotland officially lost its independence. It lost its own parliament. Why did Scotland agree to this? England offered a deal. It offered to pay off Scotland's national debt. This debt included the money lost in the Darien scheme. For many Scottish nobles and politicians, it was a way to recover their personal losses. It was a way to save the country from total ruin. Some saw it as the only option left. The English Parliament also offered trade advantages. Scottish merchants could now trade freely with English colonies. This was something they had longed for, but it came at a very high price. The Act of Union was very unpopular with ordinary Scots. They felt betrayed. They felt they had lost their identity. They felt their country had been sold off. The memory of Darien was fresh. It was a bitter pill to swallow. The Darien scheme is a story of ambition. It is a story of hope, but it is also a powerful lesson in failure. It shows what happens when ambition is not matched by good planning. It shows the dangers of a lack of proper research. The Scots went into a hostile environment. They did not understand the climate, they did not understand the diseases, they did not understand the local people. They did not understand the political landscape. They ignored warnings. They were too confident. They were too desperate. The scheme reminds us of the harsh realities of colonial ventures. Many European powers tried to colonize. Many faced similar challenges, but few suffered such a complete and devastating loss. The Darien scheme left a deep scar on the Scottish psyche. It became a symbol. It was a symbol of national pride turned to ruin. It was a reminder of a time when Scotland tried to stand on its own, and it failed miserably. Yes, a Scottish colony failed miserably in Panama. It was one of the most tragic and costly blunders in the history of any nation. It helped shape Scotland into the country it is today. It ended an independent dream and forced a new reality.